This is a talk that I gave a couple of weeks ago in early October 2014. It's on the topic of the 7 mistakes that we see in deliberate practice. And the organizers and committee members were kind enough to allow me to record this. Unfortunately, we couldn't do the video recording, and when I finally could get that all set up, I was kind of embarrassed for a camera to be pointing at me all the time. However, we've got the audio recorded nice and well. We've also got visuals that represent most of what the talk is about. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, feel free to swap into the Substack to look at the video or where it's linked to the YouTube channel. Once again, thanks to the committee members from ACP for allowing me to put this up. I hope you enjoy, and if you'd like to stay tuned to Frontiers of Psychotherapist Development, go to darylchow.substack.com. That's darylchow.substack.com. Thanks for listening.
It's very hard to sit down and your good friend is talking about you to other people in front of you there.
Just take it down.
Just take it, yeah. How are you? Good. You know, it's been 14 years I've lived in Perth. I'm originally from Singapore. And I think after 14 years, I finally got this thing about the greeting of, how are you? And I think it's amazing. It's a really good thing when you ask somebody, how are you? And you know why? I think it's like a verbal ping pong. You know, somebody asks, how are you? Ping. And then you go, good, thanks, pong. And how are you? Yeah, busy. Yeah, good, ping, and then pong. You know, how many of you been to Singapore before? Yeah. So in Singapore, where my home country is from, we don't ask about your feelings. We don't care about your feelings. We don't ask, how are you? We say, have you eaten? Have you eaten? You laugh. My wife, when we call each other, usually if I'm at practice and she'll call me and pick up the phone, or I call her, and the first thing we go, have you eaten? What's the lunch? I remember like the first time I came here, and then I went up to Tandy, and I was greeting her like, hey, I said, hi, have you eaten? And then she's like, what? Have you? Oh, right, yeah, okay. Yeah. So today, I hope that we're going to talk a little bit about this whole deliberate practice business. And how many of you are familiar with this term, deliberate practice? Yeah. And this is the first time I'm talking about this in this particular format. I'm not gonna poo-poo at the idea, but I'm really just trying to highlight some distinctions, some things around that. And it's gonna be really important for us to see these things as clearly as possible. And if I could say this, how many of you have more than 10 years of clinical experience? More than 10 years. Yeah. How many of you are less than 7? Yeah? Less than 5? So, okay. Yeah. You know, when I first began, the thing that I was really worried about, and this is about 2004, 2005, I was still working in Singapore, this was my question. I was really concerned if I'm worth my salt, if I'm just deluded, thing about in clinical practice, we go into this room, we sit down, we meet somebody, and then, in the privacy of everything else, we go back and then we tell our supervisor how things went, right? It's kind of scary. But the thing that I was very worried about this idea of if I'm any good, is this thing about performing. Now, I don't know if this is a Singaporean thing, but for those of you who know anything about Singapore, we love performing. We want to beat everybody else in anything else, like from your primary school results to we must have the first F1 race in the world in the night. We want to make sure that we're the best airport and blah, blah, blah. Even life expectancy, we want to beat everybody, we want to outlive you, And I went back after the whole, remember COVID? You remember this thing called COVID? Yeah. We went back after COVID, and then I saw this kindergarten girl in her uniform right at the back. has a slogan. It says, pride in performance. It's like kindergarten, like pride in performance. Yeah, but my wife says that I left Singapore, but I have not left Singapore in me. I'm still concerned about if I'm any good. So it's 1992. I'm in my dad's Honda Civic. And we're driving there. My mom's with us. We're coming out of the car. We're going to meet the principal. It's not because I won some kind of award, not because of some kind of merit thing. You know, there's a lot of sort of stuff in Australia. But no, it's not because of that. It's because I'm dumb. We're going to meet the principal. And my dad's not coming out of the car. He's too afraid to come out of the car. So my mom and I leaves. We go and meet Mrs. Ng. And we sit down. And while we're there, Mrs. Ng greets us, opens the door. And as soon as you walk into the principal's office, I mean, mind you, it's a boys' school. So you could smell it's like you could smell talcum powder and boys' sweat all mixed into one. And then you sit down. And she greets us, she smiles, she's very friendly, she's really nice. And then my mom, if you met Mary, my mom, most people of that era are called Mary for some reason, even the Chinese. She's called Mary. And Mary, if you met her, she's like the natural therapist. I could pale in comparison with her. She opens, you talk to her, you could tell her your life history. So anyway, Mary, my mom, just starts saying, hi, thanks for meeting with us. We just thought to ask something with you, if it's okay. And that's time in 1992 that I was in secondary 2. Secondary 2, what's the equivalent? Year 9? Year 9? And you could tell I'm counting because I'm in year 9. I failed Chinese and I failed math. I mean, which Chinese failed Chinese and math? That's me. So, but I'm on the cusp. I'm on the threshold. I was just 1% short of getting promoted to this thing called the express stream. Now, don't let the semantics catch you off guard. In Singapore, you have the gifted, you have the express. So the gifted and express, these two groups, they spend about 4 years in high school. And then you have the normal stream, normal. I was in the normal stream, right? So I was just like 1% to become, into this next group. So anyway, my mom says, we're wondering if you could help us. Mrs. Ng says, yeah, sure, what is it? My son, Daryl, and then Mrs. Ng turns and looks at me, and she looks up and down. She's kind of scrutinizing me, right? I mean, if you think about at that age, how we present ourselves, my hair was a bit like a Jimi Hendrix sort of thing, and I was really messy and all that. But anyway, so my mom says, we're thinking if you could promote, if you could look into the fact that maybe Daryl could go to the express stream. It's just like 1% short. And then Mrs. Ng says, yes, I can help you. And my mom perks up. I'm still like adding nonchalant about the whole thing. And then she says, yeah, I can help you. And my mom says, oh, great, thank you very much. Thank you very much for helping us. I can help you. And then my mom says, oh, what do we need to do? And Mrs. Ng says, if you donate to the school building fund. Do you know, I have 2 sisters and 1 mother, which means I have 3 mothers. For the first time in my life at that time, I was decisive. And not that I was smart, I was pissed. So I said, no, we're not doing it. Then my mom, no, it's okay. How much? And then she said, well, and then Mrs. Ng looks at me and she knows that I was kind of like upset with the whole idea. She said, oh, but look at this young punk. Look at his hair. I mean, what's good my hair got to do with it? But anyway, I'm bringing up this thing is because after that, I went on, I had to serve national service and blah, blah. And then I went to uni and all that. Things were good. But I got to tell you, for a long time, in this Chinese body of mine, was always focused about performing. Because I only realized this about 5-10 years ago, that when you overemphasize on performing, it really impedes deep learning. Does this make sense? An overemphasis on performance, according to people in the learning sciences, would argue that it impedes any sense of real learning. In general, in the scheme of things, that's what we're going to be talking about, this particular distinction, and why it's not just lip service. I'm sure many of you who go to PDs and stuff, we say we all value what? We all value learning. We all value developing, of course, right? But to really, really push towards this in a very personal way, towards this direction, it's going to challenge your identity. It's going to challenge your identity. Okay. So with that, we're going to talk about not the 1990s Radiohead creep. We're going to talk a bit about concept creep. Yesterday, we talked about this in our newsletter, and on Fun is Friday, we talked about that in a while. But this idea is not mine. This idea is from somebody over east. His name is Nick Haslin. Nick Haslin has this term, he calls it concept creep. Concept creep is basically the idea when a definition expands two directions. It expands vertically, which means the milder and milder situations get more inclusive, and then it expands horizontally. The categories get expanded more and more. And he argues that there are a couple of things that get expanded and has a phenomena of concept creep. Things like trauma, bullying, prejudice, racism, all these things get expanded. Now, this is not nowhere near so severe, but concept creep is important because it means that when we talk about something, are we talking about the same thing? Do we mean the same thing? Are we really saying it in a precise way? And this is going to be important for our discussion because I want to talk about the mistakes that we make, but before we talk about the mistakes, I want to highlight what it is before we sort of chip it away. And, while Tom is here today, hi Tom, Emma is going to talk about things that are of substance, no pun intended. I'm going to talk about things that are a little bit more invisible. I'm going to try and make it more visible. I've got nothing else to give other than try to speak on some things that are not there. This is a picture from Officeworks. And the thing about deliberate practice is that, like this biker, everyone else is doing it wrong. Everyone else is doing it wrong. And we're going to find a way. We're going to find a way of not just beating the pack, but we're going to find a way so that it makes sense to each of you, each of us in this process. So jump back about 10 years ago when I was first doing my doctoral in Curtin. One of the things that we were trying to do was we wanted to study highly effective therapists. We really wanted to examine that. And Scott Miller, my friend and mentor and collaborator, he had this article in 2007, and he was talking about this idea that he first stumbled upon, this K. Anders Ericsson, who studied a lot of people in developing expertise in other fields, like music, chess, Scrabble, sports, all kinds of domains, except our field. There was zero information about that. So the first question we had to ask was, where do we find these highly effective therapists? So when we combed through the literature, the thing that we found was there was something about that. They call that the master therapists. So if you look through the literature, it's talking about master psychotherapists. But David Alinsky from the University of Chicago, he argued that, how do we define them as master therapists? And it turns out that those things were basically peer nomination. So if you guys all gathered around and then say, hey, Dwayne's the master therapist, and he would be nominated as that, right? I mean, he's probably a pretty good therapist, but it's basically in the study, it is.
I just don't know.
But the thing is, we thought that was kind of strange, like it was just based on peer nomination. So we thought, okay, how do we then find the people who are really effective? And by that, we meant, okay, so let's confirm if in this situation, this therapist is really good, let's confirm. And turns out that was a real difficult thing to find. And I thought, oh no, I've got no way to study this. And then in Kansas City, of all places, in Kansas City, I bumped into my friend Bill Andrews, who's a dentist. He's a dentist who turned to become from a dentist, turned to a therapist, which is a weird change. And he said, "Oh yeah, I heard your presentation, I can help you." I was like, "Yeah, how?" He said, "Well, I have this network of people in the UK, the Practice Research Network, that has got outcomes worth of 5 years of data, i.e. they have been collecting outcomes systematically one client at a time for 5 years." I thought, shit, thank you very much. And that's how the project began. We started to study, we interviewed people, we talked with them, and we wanted to find out a little bit more about the development and the work practices. So in short, some of the things that we found. Now, I'm throwing it forward to tell you a little bit about not just what we found, it's a consolidation of everything that we've known so far. The profile of a highly effective therapist is somebody who is more psychologically minded than biological. It doesn't mean that the person doesn't believe in the effects of having coffee in the morning. It just means that the person tends to have construction, psychological theories to explain certain things. For example, if somebody's depressed, they may have a formulation of how self-criticalness may impact them rather than a serotonin hypothesis, right? They have that sort of view. And the ability to elicit negative feedback. Now, this one is kind of interesting because when we looked at this, highly effective therapists tend to get lower alliance ratings initially compared to the average practitioner. Just think about that. On average, highly effective therapists, if they're monitoring the working alliance, their scores from the working alliance, on average compared to the average practitioners, lower. Very interesting. They seem to be able to elicit negative feedback. So, okay, what is it about the way, like, how come, right? So another piece is that they have skills in handling challenging situations, and they, especially when it's more difficult, which means rarer, but they seem to have the ability to do that. They also are more critical. They have more what my colleague in Netherlands call professional self-doubt. Not personal self-doubt, professional self-doubt, meaning they're never quite fully certain. They don't pretend to be like the confident expert who knows everything. There's always this room for unknowing. And they are also more surprised by the feedback that they get. So it's not like everything they get, "Oh, yeah, I'm surprised." No, it's not that. It just means that when they get feedback, the way that when we studied this, they reported more times where the original idea and conception that they have of their client is altered, is changed. They're not hyper-fixated on their worldview about things. They're willing to let it be altered. And then finally, the thing that, based on the study that we did, the thing that gets emphasized a lot, unfortunately, it's they spend a lot of time in deliberate practice, i.e. they spend a lot of time doing things to sort of ponder, work at their edge, which we will talk a bit about that. And the difference is quite drastic. If you look at the amount of time they spend, the second, third, fourth quartile spends about 2.5, 2.6 hours per week outside of therapy, working and stuff. But when you look at the highly effective therapists, the top quartile, they spent way more time doing that. And I gotta say, as an Asian, like spending time outside doing this, it's a given. It's like homework. When 7:30 ABC comes out, this thing about that go to bed, I have to go, that's the time we start to study. That's the time that, and we so it's not rocket science. In fact, K. Anders Ericsson has found this in other fields. The amount of time spent is pretty clear. Here's his definition of what deliberate practice is. Anders would say it is individualized training activities. Okay, I emphasize individualized training activities, especially designed by somebody, a coach or a teacher, who has specific aspects of an individualized performance through successive refinement. To receive maximal benefit from the feedback, individuals have to monitor the training with full concentration, and it's effortful and is limited. and is limited because there's only that much you can push yourself at a given time. So if you take what he's saying, basically what my colleagues and I conceptualized is that we would argue that we need some clear definitions because unfortunately through the years, Erickson unfortunately also has passed away a few years ago. He has never been quite succinct or clear about what that is. And there's a lot of argument going on about how do we define this. And this is relevant to where we might make mistakes. So there are 4 pillars. There are 4 pillars in deliberate practice so far if we unpack from what he said. The first one is individualized. Individualized. This domain, it has to be specific to you, to me. It has to be very specific to that. Second, it has to be an environment of not just performing feedback, how well you're doing it well, you're doing it right, more than that. It has to be about some feedback that's nuanced to help you learn. That's the second domain. And it's not practice makes perfect. The magician Michael Omar says practice makes permanent. Repetition makes permanent. It's successive refinement, meaning, okay, if I figure out what this I need to work on, what's a tweak? What's the single little tweak I can take to step there? And then from here, what's the next tweak I need to do to step the next step? Successive refinement. And finally, the fourth domain is that it has to be guided by somebody who knows your work the way you do what you do, right? Not like some kind of standard that you have to do. It's just based on what you need to evolve and work in. Another way of putting it, we say we got to get out of our comfort zone. It's a very common saying, right? You got to get out of your comfort zone, get out of your comfort zone. But get to where? Get to where? I would say there's one area that we need to be careful of is not to our panic zone where it gets too much. We need to get towards each of our learning zone, each of our zone of proximal development. Okay. How's it so far? Okay. Do yourself a favor. In your note, if you don't mind, so far what's been said, I would like you to just put down one little note to yourself. Could be something we said, but a private thought that you have, that you're thinking, and then could you box it up for a second? We're going to look at a little bit more at this 7 ways of things that we can have mistakes on. I'm not sure how useful this road sign is. And my hopes is that the 7 other points here might be a little bit more useful on where we could go wrong, because if we could see that, then we could just keep our eyes on the path. I mean, the first one is pretty important, and once you hear it, it's hard to unhear it because it gets quite obvious after the fact. Deliberate practice is not clinical practice. You and I are in a field where when we say practice, it means the real thing. It means the real thing. And if you kind of visualize the therapy box, we have certain methodologies and therapeutic approaches. We have a certain nomenclature, the way we diagnose and label, so that we get a hang of what we're dealing with, right? This little therapy box in here. Kind of important, but deliberate practice is where it's outside of that. It's everything outside of that. Everything outside of that that makes the difference. In fact, if you think about clinical practice, it's kind of like this little graph. With time, you increase with experience. And then if you, like most of you who go through some years in clinical practice, you might recall, especially those who are under 5 years, you might recall going through this period, this valley of doubt, right? You're not so sure, what in the world am I doing? But then if you hang on long enough, you start to pick up, there's a sense of competency arising from that, right? But the evidence of this is that if you look at the intersection between experience, confidence, competence, the outcomes actually plateaus quite easily. In fact, in one of the largest studies done in Calgary, Canada, they found something that's quite sobering. 75 therapists involved, over 17 years worth of outcome data. They found that outcomes on average decline over time. Meaning to say that the more experienced therapists actually have poorer outcomes as time went on. Tom, you're nodding. Yeah, I don't know about you, but when I first heard about this, it was kind of scary to think about how Anders Ericsson talks about this. His assessment of the plateau is correct, but the graph actually tilts a little bit more downwards in decline. So when somebody says that they have 20 years of experience, it actually means 1 year of experience, repeated 19 more times. Practice makes perfect. So it looks a bit more like this. Number 2, DP is not model specific. Deliberate practice is not model specific. Now, if you survey the landscape in psychotherapy, literature, outcomes, books, and all that, all you have to do, right, just go to Amazon, type this in, and if you haven't seen it yet, there's a whole proliferation of books in the last 2-3 years. There's DP for schema therapy, there's DP for CBT, there's DP for EFT, there's DP for, all this sort of stuff. And I think it's interesting. It's interesting. But my colleagues and I are worried. We're worried that we are barking up the same cycle that we have had in the last 50, 60 years, that we are still doing the same thing. How many of you have seen this graph before? Yep. So this is a graph by Michael Lambert and his colleague, and they kind of looked at what are the things that contribute to outcomes. When they did this in the late 1990s, this was an estimate. They suspected based on what they thought might be. So right now, we have an update of this. Right now, we have something that's an update of this. It's based on a whole accumulation of work, thanks to people like Bruce Wampole from Wisconsin. If you want to geek out, you could check out his book, The Great Psychotherapy Debate, version number 2. Look at the edition number 2 to look at that. And in summary, it looks a bit like this. If you look at the treatment effects, you want to zoom in and see what are some things contributing for outcomes, right? Alliance matters a lot, as we know, but there's a bit of nuance, as I mentioned about highly effective therapists, that if you look at it over time, the trajectory is different. Highly effective therapists tend to have a gradual increase of alliance. Doesn't mean go screw it up at the first session, doesn't mean that. But what they do is they improve their engagement over time, as opposed to high engagement throughout. And then you look at expectancy, meaning how much do you believe in what you do, whether you're doing MI, you're doing metacognitive, you're doing mindfulness or schema. If you believe and you convey that, that's potent. That's really potent. And the lion's share of the impact of treatment outcomes seems to be on therapist effects, right? Therapist effects accounts for about 5 to 9%, meaning who is the treatment provider matters more than the approach itself. Treatment itself, 0 to 1% of outcomes. 0 to 1% of outcomes. Now, when you began, think about when you first began. Most of us want to cling on to some modality, right? We want to hold on to something to give us some sense of like what to do and structure. But ultimately, I think what we're all after is some kind of scaffold, some kind of structure in that. Because structure, we tend to conflate models and structure as the same thing, but structure has a scaffold. Structure creates impact, impact creates engagement, engagement creates outcome. But if you were to ask yourself to think about what exactly is structure, fundamentally structure has 3 things. Structure is an understanding at any given moment, where are you, where are you going, why? Just these 3. Where are you with your client? Where are you going? What's the general direction? If you're more CBT, you're behavioralist, you think about goals and all that, sure. But more, even existentially, you think about where am I going in my life? That's 2. And why? What's the why behind all of that? And we got to ask, well, how come when it comes to PDs, continuing educations, licensing and all that, how come it doesn't make us better therapists? These things don't impact on outcome. And I would argue one of the things that is lacking is that it lacks a sense of specific, like something like you mentioned, something of your own desire, a certain directedness that has an influence on client outcomes. And I'm going to talk about 3 domains that's important. But first, I want to talk about bank robbers, DJs, and preachers. The overlaps. I love Venn diagrams. The bank robbers and the DJs, everyone on the floor. Preacher and the DJ, are you with me? And the bank robber and the preachers, give me your money. And all 3 of them is, put your hands up. I think that when it comes to training, there are 3 knowledge that we need to hold. The 3 knowledge, one is, the first one I call it content knowledge. Content knowledge just means the information. Do you have information about certain psychopathology, certain presentation, certain clinical abnormality or things that are related to interpersonal issues that you face with your clients and also in their lives, But content knowledge is not enough. Information is not transformation. Because if it is, all we need is some self-help books, right? Second is process knowledge. Process knowledge means, given what we know, how do we have conversation about it in therapeutic settings? How do we engage somebody through the conversational reality of therapy? And then finally, conditional knowledge means if the conditions change. So you might have somebody that you're meeting, let's say, presents with anxiety. And you have a certain frame, certain blueprint of how you work with them. But what if the person's feeling anxious and depressed because of self-criticalness? How would you work with them? But if the person presents the same symptoms, how would you work with them? It was because of bereavement. You could hear your mind going in a different direction there, right? That's conditional knowledge. It means if the sort of permutations change, what do we do with that? And someone once said this. He said, a full knowledge of psychiatric and psychological information with a brilliant intellect capable of applying this knowledge is in and of itself no guarantee of therapeutic skill. This was said by somebody in the 1930s, and he was only in his 30s when he said this. This was none other than Carl Rogers. Man, it's almost, 90, 80 over years since that, pretty long time, isn't it? Next, number 3, DP is not reflective practice. Sometimes I'm not trying to like chew on the importance of semantics, but reflection is necessary, but not sufficient. Reflection is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Why? Homer would tell you this. Stephen Wallfish, the late Stephen Wallfish, when he asked private practitioners how effective they thought they were, most of them rated themselves about the 80th percentile, which breaks the bell curve. And we thought, okay, let's kind of replicate this in our study, and we asked people that we knew of the outcomes. And it turns out their own self-assessment has got no correlation with their actual performance. Their own reflection of their own work is not tied into reality. And just a few weeks ago, we just released a study in China. We did the same thing with Chinese therapists. Turns out that our humility and modesty as Asians that has no impact on our self-assessment bias as well. We Chinese were also inflated. To look at the difference in self-assessment, so again, quartiles, I know I failed in math, there should be a 4th quartile, but we don't have a 4th quartile because there was not enough therapists to represent the people who were the least effective. I think you know why that is, but so we thought it's not fair to compare. But when we compared the highly effective to the average practitioners, this is what we found of their own view of how effective they are. The highly effective therapists thought they were about the 72nd percentile. And the other 2 groups thought they were doing about the same. So there is limits to our own capacity to see things. We did a study as well when we call it the difficult conversations in therapy in 2015. We did a pilot study, we put therapists through difficult situations, they watch a video and they had to try and respond. And then we help them with giving them specific feedback. It seems that generally people do improve. But we thought, okay, let's do a bit of randomized study. So this paper is about to be released in the next week or two. It's taken years to get this out, but this is what we found in a randomized situation. We had a control group, meaning the control group was just asked to see various difficult clinical scenarios, and they did their best to respond, and they had to do their own self-reflection. And in that process, by the way, it's 2 weeks long. It's 2 weeks long. So there's a lot of time to chew on it. The other group that you're about to see, they were given feedback. They were not given performance feedback. They were given little nuance, some principle-based feedback about how to think about the situation and respond in their own unique ways. This is what we found. The group in the control group, the red, over different scenarios, they scored this way. And the group that was getting the feedback, they improved. This was not, again, it's not a surprising thing. What was surprising was that when it came to scenario 4 and scenario 8, we changed the scenarios. We gave them a totally new scenario, meaning what they learned from here, they were able to transfer that into a different situation. Next, number 4, DP is not purposeful practice. DP is not purposeful practice. So what is purposeful practice? A good way maybe we can compare this with the triangle. It is guided by, yes, by someone, a teacher, who runs a curriculum, but the curriculum is course learning objective. It is not specific to your learning objective. It's based on your results, it's based on the performance, and it's about doing more, reps, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with purposeful practice because we do need that, especially in teaching situations, especially when you're beginning, you may need some of that, but there's a distinction. Because if you see this, you might recall this. They're a little bit different, isn't it? It's individualized. The feedback is more nuanced. It's successive tweaking, right? Because all of us need to figure out a way to be able to do something that's unique to us, right? You don't want to end up in this competition. And like any kind of path, this is the path that's created. You know, we're asked to go a certain way. But if you let people have their way, they're not going to take it that way, right? They're going to find their own way to deal with that. So it's important that while we're thinking that we find the way, things do catch up. You know, we got to always be tweaking and adjusting with each person and not thinking that that's the only one way, the be-all and the end-all. Next, DP is not about you. You know, one time this girl, I mean, she comes from the Irish family. She in the Irish family, they sing and, you know, they dance a lot. It's not a unique thing. But one day, the cousins and aunties and uncles came over, and the mom went to Sarah and said, "Hey, Sarah, come on over. Come out from your room." She's about 8, 9, and she said, "Take out your guitar and come and sing for us." And Sarah says, "No." And mom says, "Why not? Just take your guitar, come and sing for us." I said, "No, I'm not doing that. Why are you not doing that? All these aunties and uncles and cousins, I don't see them often, and what should I do is kind of embarrassing." And they go back and forth and arguing, and the mom lost it, and the mom just stamped her foot down and said, "Honey, it's not about you. Just take your guitar, come out here and sing for us." Flash forward 20 years later, she's a singer, and she's on stage, and the spotlight, Dwayne knows this, you're a performer, right? The spotlight's all on who? On her, the performer, right? It's on the performer. But she just unconsciously remembers what her mom says. "Honey, it's not about you. It's not about you." Because when you're there for a concert, you're there for the audience. You're there for the people. It's not about you. It's about them. It's how you help them have a great moment. Any of you have done any training in public speaking before? You know, there's what's you have here? You know, what's that? I suddenly lost the term. There's a group all over the world that trains in public speaking. There you go, Toastmasters. One of them, and I know sometimes they would say, "Okay, stand in front of the mirror, get ready to deliver your speech and do that, right? And do that." That's probably the worst advice you could give. Because why? Because it's not about you. Yes, you become too self-conscious. You become overly focused about you, and that's not the point. And the way that we can get away from this de-emphasis of focus is we focus on the client, get as close as possible to their evolution, one session at a time. Do not get detached from their outcome. The only way to do that is to be systematic about that. And in terms of the deliberate practice effort, it's very easy to get good at an instrument. It's very easy to get good at an instrument. It's much harder to get good at the song craft. Are you with me? It's very easy. You just practice the scales. You just play the thing, right? You just practice and you work on those little things because it's a kind environment. That's what they call it. It's very easy work. But you try and improve at writing a good song. You try to be the next Adele or Taylor Swift. Forget it. It's really hard, right? It's really, really difficult. So we need to be systematic on the way that we do it. The way that we can, and we talk about this in a couple of our publications, is there are 4 sort of steps. The first thing that we need to do is to be able to integrate client outcome measures as a base. And then once you have that, you can develop your baseline, meaning on aggregate, not just with one client at a time, but on aggregate, how are you doing? And then number 3, you could figure out what's a leverage. What's something that you can work on that's a bang for the buck, that has general improvement, that has an impact on other people, not just one client, and you can develop a learning system that's sustainable over time to be able to do that. Next, DP needs guidance. DP needs guidance. This is a common question that I get asked when we run the intensive workshops. They ask, so can I do this on my own? I say, I think that's the aim. Of course, the aim is independence, right? I mean, you don't want them to be always like dependent on somebody, but they can go and evolve to that. But first, you have to start with some kind of guidance. Why? When we survey and we ask people, what is the single biggest challenge that people face in their professional development, people who are at the edge of working in deliberate practice, this is what they say. There are a couple of people who said the difficulty in work-life balance. Some talk about self-doubt, as we mentioned, but many of them don't know what to work on, don't know what exactly they need to focus and work on, because there's so many things that you could be working on. But if you chase 2 rabbits, you catch none. Very important for us to be able to focus and to figure out what actually has leverage. Then let's turn to our signature pedagogy, clinical supervision. Really important in our development. But this is what we found in the studies looking at the impact of clinical supervision on client outcome. And there are studies that have been done about this with large sample size, right? They found that supervision variance explained about less than 1%, in fact about 0.8 to 0.9% of client outcome. And as if that they couldn't trust the Canadians, the Americans did the same replication study, and they found that supervision accounted for 0% of the variance in client outcome. Right? Why is that the case? And if you stop to think about this, Edward Watkins Jr., he would say that if we cannot show that supervision affects patient or client outcomes, then how can we justify the amount of time, money, and spend in that domain of emphasis? Curious case in point, one of the world's greatest coach, his name is John Wooden, basketball coach. He won the Medal of Honor when Obama was president. And they studied him with fair level of scrutiny because he's so well loved. And one of the things he said that I really liked, he said, people don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care. Right? People don't care about how much you know unless they know how much you care. And people felt that from him. So let me preface with that. But what they found when they examined the way he coached was that 75% of the time when he was training the players was spent not so much as information, but he was providing discrete information. What to do, what not to do, how to bring it down, how to bring it up on certain things. In contrast, 7% of the time was spent dispensing compliments or disapproval. I mean, just think about that for a second. I think sometimes it might render us a bit more speechless if we can't say, oh, that's good, that's great, perfect, wonderful, right? Whereas he's very specific on the way when he dispenses feedback. Finally, I left the last two curly ones here, but the last one is, I don't think deliberate practice should be mandated. When I was preparing for this, somebody sent me this little document, Professional Competency for Psychologists from APRA. Anybody seen this, an advanced copy of this? It's a new one that just came out. And maybe I should show it to everybody, but it looks something like that. And one of the things, competency 3, it says, exercises professional reflexivity. Big word, reflexivity. Purposeful and deliberate practice. And self-care. Don't forget about yourself. Yeah, competency 3, especially on 3.6. So I'm not against the idea, but DP is not competency. DP is excellence. You're pushing even beyond what is required of you. So I'm not sure if we should go down there to say that that's where we need to go. But in summary, DP is not clinical practice, is not model-specific, it's not reflective practice, though reflection is necessary. It's not purposeful practice, though purposeful practice has its place. It's not about you. DP needs guidance and should not be mandated. So let me sum it up in a way of thinking about this as my 3 wishes for you on what we could go with this. There is a difference between evidence-based practice versus practice-based evidence. It's not a play of words, but evidence-based practice is based on what the clinical research is showing us, right? I think that's important, but I would argue that it would be great if you could build your own evidence. Show of hands if you're already using some kind of systematic client outcomes in your clinical practice. Yep. So it'd be great for more of you to do that. And not just do that, but develop your own baseline, develop your own, little small data. The small data is way more powerful than big data, which is detached, impersonal. This is more localized. Because what's best may not be best for you. So if you could have that information, it'd be really useful. Then you can combine your intuition with the data for you to make better decisions as you go. And you are able to tweak, because the best form of standardization is kind of customization. Number 2, my wish for you is not just focus on doing things right, but placing your attention on doing the right things. Doing things that actually has leverage on your outcomes, because outcomes, it's a hard thing to think about how we can actually influence that. We need to do things that's predictive and influenceable, things that can actually have the leverage. So one of the documents that we created is called the Taxonomy of Deliberate Practice Activities. It helps you break down with your supervisor in consultation of what you can work through. I think we're on version 6.1 now. There's many iterations. Later on, you get a link. You could download this for you. And then my wish for you on this is to be able to focus on learning. My mom then sort of chuckles. We're back in the principal's office with the boys' sweat and talcum powder. We're in there. And my mom says something to the principal or to me. I don't know. Maybe she's just commenting. She said something that didn't make sense to me. It only started to strike me more recently in my 40s. And she laughed when the principal said, about the donating the money. And she laughed even more when I said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to donate. But she said, oh, it's okay. We keep it as that. He will stay for 5 years. Maybe Daryl is just a late bloomer. And I thought, what does that mean? Is that an insult or what? But I think it's really important, because if we take time to be able to do what we need to do in our own time, we can then be able to grow. Because the things that we want to do when we're learning is not to be a dabbler, somebody who's just, try something really hard and then after efforts decline. nor are we trying to be kind of a hacker where like, yeah, if I learn this one specific model, schema therapy for borderline personality disorder, if I get this right, and then, it's not really going to go in the long run, or you're a bit more obsessive. I'm a bit more obsessive. You want to, go down that rabbit hole and learn as much as you can, but it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to do that because you burn out and fade away, as they say. Instead, you want to be able to have time to understand that we perhaps are like oak trees. It takes some time. It takes some time. It takes some time for us to evolve and to grow. Now, if you want the taxonomy, if you want to learn more about all these stuff on the things that we spoke of, there's no catch. There's no upsell or anything. You just go in there, and the email will be sent to you. If you like reading, for me, I honestly, writing books is a way to make friends for a painful introvert. So we've got other books with my colleagues and all. And Dwayne mentioned the one that's supposed to come out probably in a month or two. In general, it's more about helping people who are making transitions in their life. It's called Crossing Between Worlds. Fingers crossed that might be out soon. And if you want to keep abreast, Frontiers of Psychotherapist Development releases every Friday. We talk about concept creep, the last round. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. There's all this back catalog, all accessible for free to you. I must say, it's a real treat to be speaking in a place I call home, and it's nice to have good company and familiar faces and friends all around. Thanks for having me.